Mr. Jones, is Baltimore City the only jurisdiction that used the write-in votes, the write-in ballots?
No, Baltimore, the state of Maryland is uniform. I can't even say the word there. We all, what happens in the city happens all over the state as
happens all
far
over the
as
state.
the election process.
But we had a document that was shared with us, which, as far as I understand, is an evaluation form that the State Board of Elections did that speaks to discrepancy scores between voter cards issued and provision. It's regular and provisional vote discrepancies. And I was going to ask the State Board about it, but I had thought that you would still be here, and so are you familiar with this form
Well, basically, I
or this
know
report?
it's probably something that came after the primary
bringing you one.
election.
Ms. Murray will bring you a copy.
David McManus, welcome to Baltimore City, welcome to this hearing, and thank you for being here, and thanks for letting the city go first.
So, and I'm a member of a 5-person oversight board that oversees the state board.
Oh, I
So-
see. So you oversee the overseers.
Yes, in a manner of speaking,
Okay, I
yes.
see.
So we know from our oversight responsibilities what the locals are doing based on what the professional staff at the state board reports to us.
I see.
And they are the ones that provide the guidance and the resources to the various local boards so these things can run as smoothly as possible.
Right.
Now, on the topic of your hearing, the problems with the primary, we did a number of things, focusing specifically on the problem with provisional ballots. We did 3 things. First, we conducted, in conjunction with the state board, or the local boards, Baltimore City, but the other locals helped us with this, essentially a forensic analysis to see if we can identify the scale of the problem and where it occurred. And we were able to isolate on a precinct by precinct basis
Really?
exactly how many provisional ballots were improperly scanned. None of them should have been scanned under any circumstance.
Right.
So it is a mistake at some level for any provisional ballot to be scanned, and we knew, based on the math, how many were scanned at each precinct, and it was over 1,000.
And just, I
Citywide.
mean, sometimes I'm a teacher by profession. You just have to stop and say to people who are listening and who've heard about provisional ballots but really don't know what they are. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like you, somehow or another, you don't have the right to vote. Maybe you didn't register and you came in to vote, or you went to the wrong place, or they couldn't find your name on a list where it should have been, and therefore, but you have the right to vote, so you get to cast a ballot. But after the fact, the election board's going to have to somehow legitimize that you are a voter in the city. So you have your ballot gets put into an envelope, and all your identification is put on the outside of that envelope. And so those two things are separated when they arrive after this verification is made. Then your ballot goes away from your name, and it gets counted that way. I think I'm describing this correctly.
That's about right,
So
sure.
if you scan, if at the election poll, you do this, and then someone takes that ballot of yours, which looks just like a regular ballot, and scans it, that's, you're dead. I mean, you can't, they can't really count it. I don't want to, because they don't know that it came from a legitimate resident or whatever, however they gauge that, because the sheet went in and your name never did anywhere, and it's not connected, and who knows, right? Am I right?
Yes, you have put your finger on the scope of the problem. A provisional ballot's a good thing, because if you are not on the list when you go
Right.
to check in, rather than turning you away,
Right.
We allow you to fill out a provisional ballot so we can double check to see whether you are just registered at a
Yeah,
different
sometimes
precinct
the
or not
computer has it
eligible at
wrong.
all. But until we've made that determination, that vote shouldn't be counted and shouldn't be scanned. Because
Right,
once it is,
because-
you can't uncount it. And that voter may be ineligible,
What a
he may be
mess.
ineligible in that precinct, he may be voting for races for which he is not eligible to vote. But once it's in there and it's scanned, it's counted. So that's an improperly
And
counted vote that
it's
we
like an
cannot
orphan
remove.
child.
I'm sorry?
It's like an orphan child, and you can't put it back together again.
Yes.
That's a mixed metaphor.
And it shouldn't happen. So the second thing that we did was to try to find out how it happened and why. And after the fact, that was difficult, because as you've pointed out, the ballots are indistinguishable once they're scanned. And all we know is that either an election judge improperly scanned it, or an election judge improperly permitted a voter to put it in the scanning unit. And we can't
How
tell
did
why.
you know it was provisional?
I'm sorry?
How did the people on the other end know it was provisional?
Well, they should know, because as soon as you walk in, if you are not on the electronic poll book listed as a voter eligible to vote in that precinct, you should be segregated and sent to a different table, and you're filling out a different ballot. This also should be segregated. Those ballots should be nowhere near the other ballots, and the voter should be nowhere near the other voters.
Right.
And it's a problem if that breaks down, and it broke down on a wide scale
Yeah.
in Baltimore. So the third thing we did is try to figure out how to prevent it. And you heard Mr. Jones talk about that. In conjunction with the locals, we set up a committee to look at it and see if we can do a couple things. Number one, reinforce to the judges the need for segregation of the ballots and those voters, so they remain separate until they can be
Physically.
physically, yes. And that was a lot of the recommendations the committee made, which were almost all adopted, had to do with the physical layout and putting them in envelopes and reinforcing the need to keep everything separate. And you have, I think, a letter from the state administrator, Linda Lamone, identifying in considerable detail all the steps that we have implemented for the general to try to make sure that the problem that happened in the primary doesn't recur. And I think those steps will help immensely.
And, well, let me ask Councilman Branch. He has some questions, and then followed by Councilman Henry.
Certainly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the situation of a person who have been purged from a list, he went to a voting location where he thought that he voted on a regular process. He may have missed maybe a general election and haven't voted in 6 years, but yet he's pulled from the list. Are provisional ballots given to people who's purged? Because in some instance, I know for a fact that you have people who go to those polling locations and they believe that they voted in that location, and yet they're turned away altogether.
I don't think that's supposed to happen. If you are not on the e-poll book list, you should be offered a provisional, regardless of why you're not on the list. You're offered a provisional, then that is and your ballot is coupled with an application that you fill out, giving the information that will enable the election workers, when they review the applications, to determine whether you are eligible or not, and where. So then, depending on what that application shows, your ballot will either not be counted at all, or it will be put in a pile to be counted along with the rest of them by hand. Not scanned, but counted by hand. Well, we keep a record of each provisional ballot application that's filled out. That's kept, and we can count it. And we did count them as part of the forensic analysis. And that's how we can tell approximately how many provisionals were improperly scanned, because each ballot should have an application associated with it. So if we had an application but no ballot, we knew that that ballot probably was scanned. And we could double check that, because we also know how many people were on the list and voted, and we could count the total number of ballots and then subtract to get to the number of improperly scanned provisionals.
You have a copy of this report,
I do.
which, and again, I just want to be clear, I received this from a third party. So the first thing I want to do, just out of due diligence, is this actually something that the State Board of Elections prepared?
This is the first I've seen it, but it looks like other spreadsheets I've seen
Okay, all right.
with similar information on it, and that's part of the routine audit that is done post-election. And also, we did separate ones as part of the forensic analysis, so we can determine the extent of the problem and what happened in which precinct.
Because the question that normally I would have asked the local board, but if, you know, hopefully you'll know, is did you work with them, and for the viewers at home or people here in the audience without a copy, the columns in this report include total voter cards issued per polling place, regular and provisional, average number of voter cards issued per hour in a 13-hour election day, totality of incompetence, which I find to be an interesting choice of column heading, which is total regular and provisional vote discrepancies per polling place, and then a discrepancy scoring system where if you have 5 to 10 discrepancy, you're ranked 1, and it ranges up to, if you have over 80 discrepancies, you're ranked a 5. And then a percentage for each polling place of number of total discrepancies per total voter cards issued. And I would say the vast majority of the polling places had 4% or fewer in terms of total discrepancies, and what I will call a laudable, if not as large as we would all like, had no discrepancies, you know, or had 0%. But there were a number of precincts that had double digit, you know, ranging from, you know, 1531 West North Avenue in zip code 17, where 10%, they had a 10% rating of the total 196 voter cards issued. They had 20 regular and provisional vote discrepancies. And that's just number 10 on the top 10 list. There was a precinct at 2434 West Belvedere Avenue where they had 57%. They only had a total of 112 voter cards issued, and there were 64 vote discrepancies. Here's my question. My question is, I get that there has been training or discussions of need for better training since the primary in preparation for the general. But that's sort of like if you have a test and there's 2 kids in the class who score really badly and the rest of the class kind of does okay, that's sort of like saying, well, then we're going to review the material with everybody for the next 6 months, as opposed to saying, we're going to take those 2 kids and we're going to get them some extra help. Do you know if the local board identified the individual judges who were working at the polls where there were particularly large percentages of discrepancies and set those judges aside either for special, you know, extra training to make sure that they get it, or maybe not ask those people to be judges again?
Yes.
Do you know if either of those things happened?
Yes.
Okay.
I asked specifically for that post-election because we saw from other documents like the one that we have here that the problems seemed to be predominant in certain precincts.
Right.
It wasn't citywide. There were certain problem precincts where it happened a lot.
Right.
And I asked that all the election judges in those precincts be kind of targeted to find out what happened. And I know Mr. Jones took a lot of steps in that regard and had a survey that he filled out, that he had them fill out if they were in those precincts, to try to focus our efforts on those judges. And he could probably give you more details than I can, unfortunately, but I did see some reports from him where he had made that effort and identified those judges, and it's a lot of judges, unfortunately.
Did he get
Even
rid
if
of
it's
them?
10 precincts, it's a lot of judges spread out over those
couple dozen,
precincts.
yeah.
So, and they were doing different jobs over different times, but there was a focus on them. But you're right, when we are training people again for the general, we have to train them all. And the election judges manual was changed to reinforce the need to segregate, and all the other mechanical, physical things we did had to be taught as well to everybody.
And I don't want to dismiss that or in any way, say that it's not important to have that, additional training for everyone. But I really want to make sure that we are, focusing something extra on the people who clearly had a significantly higher percentage of mistakes. And so then the next question that I can ask you, and I guess we would still look for a more specific answer to come from the local board about what exactly happened to these people. But what power or authority do you have at the state level to require that they do something in particular? Like, can you, if, and I'll use just as an example, let's say that the local board decides that it's enough to just make all the judges who, were in these high level of discrepancy precincts, it's just enough to make them attend an extra 8 hours of training, and then they get put back into the rotation pool for the general. If the local board decides that, and the state board thinks, well, that's actually ridiculous. You either, maybe you do that for the places where there were 5 and 6% instead of 2 and 3, but for the ones where there were 42% and 57% of the, that those people need to not be judges anymore. If hypothetically the state board made that policy decision, do you have the power to tell the local board these people can't be judges?
I think that would have to be a local board matter.
Okay.
This document that has been referred to all night, first of all, I want to say I think that this is disgraceful that this hearing is happening within a week of the early voting starting. So anything that you've talked about today with Armstead Jones and L.A. Wong and all these people doesn't even have enough time to get implemented. So if there was an issue that you raised, it's not really going to get solved. And I think that there were some specific questions here that we can't even get answers to now. So this document that's been referred to, this one, it looks like this.
Same one.
Yes, and I actually have some things I can present to you to make understanding this document more clear. The only issue that I wanted to really talk about, bring people's attention to, is the election judges. So Maryland law, if you have the paper that looks like this, Maryland election law says that you have to have a Democrat or a majority party judge along with an election judge that's not part of the majority party. So that would be Republicans, or it could be unaffiliated voters, or even green. That didn't happen in the last primary, and what I wanted to ask Armstead Jones is how do you go about assigning the party affiliation of the election judges? How do you determine who goes where? So if you look on the other side of that paper, the one that has a table at the top, that's just a listing of all the election judges and their party affiliations. There were 292 Republicans, and that's based on the State Board of Elections, and the Board of Elections says that that's 292 Republicans, but I've actually gone in and looked at people's voter registration. There were not 292 Republicans, so, but we'll go with their number.
How do you go in and look at the
through GOP Data Center that I know is not updated, but these people's registration was long, hard Democrats.
You mean you have the names of the election judges?
Yes,
Okay.
that was actually obtained through Public Information Act request too. So they do know which judges were working at the precincts, and we still don't know if those people are going to keep working there. We don't know if they were even talked to. I mean, they said that they talked to them, but how do we know? Okay, so 36 Republicans were assigned to the Baltimore City Elections Office on primary day. Armstead Jones, Mr. Jones mentioned that and said he had, I think, 80 people total assigned. So as people didn't show up, as election judges didn't show up, I think he had a responsibility to make sure that there was a non-Democrat judge at these poll sites. And that didn't happen according to the Public Information Act request that we received. So there are 18 polls with no non-Democrat election judges. And that's, you might be thinking, well, why does it even matter? The reason that is put into place is so that there is no collusion between, parties. The point is that that's what the law says. So if Armstead Jones is not willing to allocate people in accordance with Maryland law, what other laws is he going to bend? Well, we're supposed to have X amount of judges, but we don't really need that many. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do we know what he chooses to do or not? So I just wanted to be in the record that he could have assigned those people, and he chose to not do that at 18 poll locations.
The disenfranchised voters of Baltimore City deserve a true assessment of what happened in April. I hear this conversation around training and retraining. The training isn't the issue, the process is broken. The stricture of the organization are broken. I would like to see somebody put in a request for state action that would require a top to bottom process review of this mess we have that we call an election. I don't know how we get that, because I'm not convinced that this board of elections that we have in Baltimore City is ever going to push the director to do what's right to benefit the voters of the city. That's the role of the board. In addition to a work process assessment, I'd like this board to become more transparent around what it does, what the outcomes of elections are, and yeah, we know who the winner is. Tell us the process. Tell us what went wrong and what didn't go well. I think we deserve that. And the fact that we had a young Republican having to share that kind of data and request through Freedom of Information, the data, is a problem. It's a real problem, because we're not always going to have this young lady around. This ought to be a transparently inherent step in this process where we get the data that she shared with us. Consider that the voters are the most important aspect of this process. And there was a lawsuit that got dismissed this week around the fact that voters believed they were disenfranchised. Nobody's addressed that. And I thought this hearing was going to attempt to address that.
How would we address the lawsuit?
Get the information. What is this hearing about? It's an investigative hearing. That's what I thought. Around the problems that occurred. I guess I'm expecting too much. But nonetheless, I'm making the request. I'd like this board of elections to become more transparent. As my elected officials, please figure out how to make that happen.